Hello everyone and welcome to episode 49, actually episode 49, of the Card Combo Show with me, Chocobilly, where we look at the weird and wonderful card combinations in the Final Fantasy TCG, and this week we're going to be focusing only on summons. So, we're going to be looking at Ifrita from Opus 9, Exodus the Judge-Sal from Opus 3, Remora from Opus 12, Hades from Opus 1, and Alexander from Opus 13. Also, I feel like the cool new card animations. I've moved to a different software. It's making my life a lot harder, but it looks cool, so it's worth it, I guess. Anyway, cool. Hades is a 5 CP ice summon with the text, choose one forward and one backup the opponent controls. Dull the forward and return the backup to its owner's hand. Your opponent discards one card from his or her hand. So, he hasn't really seen much play in the past, like 3 years, or even in, like, the first year, but I still think he's quite fun. He's got a weird ability because he requires a forward and a backup and makes them discard and does a lot of things all at once, but a lot of cool things, I think. And I'm gonna link him with a very new card, so new, it hasn't actually been released yet, which is Leviathan, Lord of the Wall. Where's the text? When a character is returned from the field to its owner's hand, choose one forward opponent controls, it loses 9,000 power until the end of the turn. Sorry for the crappy picture quality, but like I said, the card hasn't actually been released yet, and there hasn't even been a proper JPEG of this card released yet, so having to use a screen grab. But basically, you can use Hades to bounce one of your opponent's backups, and then you get to minus 9k something when you've got Leviathan on the field. Pretty cool. Not to mention the fact you've also dulled a forward as well, so it could be the same forward. Maybe you just want to kill that one forward. But ultimately, you can move two forwards out of the way if you want by minus 9k one thing, dulling one thing out of the way, then you bounce it back up, and your opponent also has to discard as well. Then we've got Barrel Eye. So when your opponent discards one or more cards from their hand due to your summons or abilities, choose one character, dull and freeze it. So I really like this card, well I really like Hades just because if your opponent has no cards in hand and you bounce that back to their hand, they then have to discard that. The big thing here is that just the way Hades' text is worded means that all like the dulling and the bouncing happens, and then your opponent discards, and it will be the card that they have had bounce back to hand if they have no cards in hand. But with Barrel Eye, again, like with Leviathan, you can move two things out of the way, so you can move two forwards out, bounce it back up, and also make them discard. But you can actually, because Barrel Eye can allow you to freeze a character if you so choose, so you can actually dull a forward out of the way, bounce it back up, dull and freeze another backup, and then your opponent has to discard as well. That's kind of mean. And then we've got Hope as well, so more Ice Wind. So when a dull character you control, sorry, wrong thing. When an active character your opponent controls becomes dull due to some abilities, freeze it. So obviously Hades dulls a forward your opponent controls, sorry. So that would mean Hope would then freeze it as well. And if you combine this with Barrel Eye, it actually means you get to dull and freeze a backup, get dull and freeze a forward, you bounce it back up to your opponent's hand, and they discard. That's a lot to take on board, but you know, pretty good. Then you got Mystic Knight and Mystic Knight. So both of these obviously reduce the cost of your ice summons, or just summons in general, but it's a good way because Mystic Knight can obviously, the first Mystic Knight can be in Ice Wind, so it works alongside Barrel Eye and Hope. But just you can have three of them on the field at the same time, so the cost required to cast your ice summons is reduced by 1. So if you had all 3 Mystic Knights, Hades would only cost you 2, which is kind of hilarious. But you could have those 3 Mystic Knights on the field and then attack with the right hand Mystic Knight, and then Hades only costs you 1. Chances of that happening are pretty slim, but either way, being able to reduce Hades' cost and be able to dull something, bounce it back up, and make them discard. If you can reduce Hades' cost even by 1 CP, it's worth it because he actually gets a lot of value for money, especially comboed with the things like I said earlier with Barrel Eye and Hope. Scale Toad. Okay, so at the end of your opponent's turn, if your opponent has 2 cards or more in their hand, your opponent discards 1 card from their hand. Obviously, Hades makes your opponent discard a card as well. So if you combine something like Hades and Scale Toad with something like Barrel Eye, actually it means that you're getting to dull and freeze 2 things out of the way as well as bouncing a backup and dulling a forward. Unfortunately, I'd like to be able to use it so Hades can put your opponent's hand size up, but then they have to discard it anyway, so realistically, Scale Toad either is going to take effect or it's not, because Hades makes your opponent discard a card regardless. But it's just more kind of pressure on your opponent to have to keep on discarding things, and ultimately just removing their backup as well at the end of their turn also means that they have less CP to play with their backups. Maybe you're bouncing an ability they would have liked to have used in your turn, then it means that they can't do that as well, and just making your opponent discard alongside this means that they're just losing their options and unable to do things. Cool, Zidane. So, when your opponent discards a card from their hand, due to your summons or abilities, choose one win character activated. So, obviously you can't reactivate some of your ice things, but if you cast Hades, you know, again, dull something, bounce something, and then they discard, you then get to reactivate something. If, as I mentioned earlier, with the Mystic Knights, you're actually able to reduce Hades' cost, and then use Zidane to be able to reactivate some of your backups as well, or doesn't have to be backups, it could be forwards if you wanted. But just again getting more value for money by reducing the Hades cost in total and just applying that constant pressure on your opponent. Bard. So similar sort of thing again, apart from less pressure on your opponent, more just rejuvenating your own hand, so to speak. So when your opponent discards a card from their hand, due to your summons or abilities, you may put Bard into the break zone, and when you do so, draw 2 cards. So I mean, even if you discarded 2 cards and play 1 CP for Hades, you then can put Bard into the break zone to get you another card to hand. What's good about Bard as well is the fact that he can be dull as well, so he can be part of the cost paid for Hades, so you can dull him to pay for him. But again, this is all about, I mean, all these cards would work in the same deck, basically, except for Leviathan, but you could try if you really wanted. Just reducing the cost of something like Hades and getting so much value for money, and then increasing the value by using things like Hope and Barrel Eye, and also increasing your kind of lead on your opponent by increasing your hand size and rejuvenating your backups as well. So yeah, just really hammering home how Hades can actually be quite good for this sort of thing. Doga. Okay, right, let's get out of ice and get out of wind. When you cast a summon of 4 or more, choose a 1 backup across 3 or more your opponent controls. Break it. This effect will only trigger once per turn. So you could use Hades to bounce a backup, and then use Doga to break another backup. I mean, that's just mean. What's good about Hades as well is obviously he can bounce some of the smaller backups as well, which you may not consider a good thing because obviously your opponent's going to be able to replay them for cheap. But generally these days, unless it's something like Doga or Une, when your opponent's playing high-costed backups, they're actually getting a lot of value for money. Like, you don't want to bounce something like Star Sibyl or Shantoto, because most high-costed backups have entry abilities, and you don't want to re-give them that entry ability, so getting rid of some of their smaller backups, the things that Doga cannot break, is actually probably better in that case. Right, next we have, if it wants to load, Alexander. So, he's a weird card from Opus 13, but I really like him. So he's a 2 CP Earth EX Burst summon. Choose 1 forward you control and up to, so remember that, up to 1 forward your opponent controls. Until the end of the turn, the former gains 3000 power, and this forward cannot become dulled by your opponent's summons or abilities. If you have received 5 points of damage or more, also deal the latter damage equal to the highest power forward you control. So you don't have to choose your opponent's forwards, which is good, because sometimes choosing your opponent's forwards allows them to do things. So maybe they've got something like Neo X Death, at which point you're like, well, this is just going to screw me entirely. So it allows you to kind of get around things like that. However, sometimes it's actually more beneficial for you to choose their forwards, because if they, say you cast Alexander, you choose your forward and you choose your opponent's forward, and then they do something to your forward, and it leaves the field for whatever reason, the effect of choosing the end effect of deal the latter damage equal to the highest power forward you control will still take effect, which is really good, because what your opponent will probably forget is that it's not the forward you chose on your side that's going to be dealing damage, but it's actually your most highest power forward you control. So let's say hypothetically you cast Alexander and it was on a forward that would become the highest power. If they remove that, it would then be the next one in line to be able to deal the damage. So it's still going to be dealing damage unless you have no forwards, obviously. But yeah, just a nice little interaction there. So something like Deleter. So when Deleter is chosen, he gains plus 1000 power till the end of the turn. So you use Alexander, he chooses him, he actually technically will gain plus 4000 power, which is good, which will then make him an 11k, which means he probably will be highest power forward, so then deal 11k to something else. Now you use something like Graviton. I've talked about this before, but it's a great combo. When you cast another summon, choose 1 forward you control. It gains plus 2000 power until the end of the turn. So you can use something like Graviton and Alexander both on Deleter, which means that Deleter will get plus 1,000 for each one of these choosers, and then plus 2,000 from Graviton and plus 3,000 from Alexander. So that's actually plus 7,000 to Deleter. Obviously, it would be plus 5 to any other forward, but still pretty hilarious in my opinion. But what's good about that is obviously that Deleter will be huge, and it doesn't even have to be Deleter, it can be plus 5k to something else, and that will then become the largest forward as well, and will probably become the largest forward. You could do it on a little 5k forward, and then it becomes a 10k, then Alexander will deal 10k to your opponent. Again, what's also good about this is the fact that all of Alexander's text is one resolution, so your opponent has to think, when you cast Alexander and you choose your forward, and you choose their forward, which forward do they actually want to remove from your field? Because let's say you're using Alexander to, I don't know, keep a little 5k forward alive on your field, and then you've got another 10k forward, like, I don't know, Minerva, that's sitting there. They're going to have to decide, actually, do I want to commit to killing the thing I was trying to kill before, the little 5 CP, or do I now want to get rid of Minerva, because Minerva is what's actually going to be the source of the damage for Alexander. So there's a lot of weird things here with this card, and that's one of the reasons I like it so much. Anyway, Lava Spider. The attack forwards you control gain plus 3,000 power. Got a little 7k forward, you attack with it, and then before your opponent can announce a block or anything like that, you can then cast Alexander. You can choose to, again, buff a different forward, but then your highest power forward, which is probably the 10k, which is attacking, will then deal damage to the forward you chose on their side. Scarmelian. So let's say you cast Alexander and you choose, I don't know, a forward of 7k power, and you also have a forward of 5k power. Your opponent's then like, nah, I'm happy to take 5k from something, so they actually decide to remove the 7k from the field, at which point you can then play Scarmelian, which means that even though it's only a little 5k forward, the forward that's receiving the damage will have that damage doubled, so then it'll become 10k. So even if you only have small forwards on the field, using Scarmelian alongside Alexander means that, well, you can effectively call Alexander a 4 CP summon there, but the damage it deals is doubled, which is alright. Actually, really, it's more like a 6 CP summon, because it is going to be 2 cards from hand, Alexander and Scarmelian, and then the 2 CP for Scarmelian and 2 CP for Alexander. When we talk about CP costings, obviously you can say that for any time you ever do anything which requires a card out of hand, that is 2 CP gone from your hand, because that is 2 CP you could have used elsewhere. But ultimately, that applies for pretty much any interaction where a card comes from your hand, so I tend to not touch on that so much, because if it applies to every interaction like that, then it also doesn't apply to every interaction. It's only when you start factoring in action abilities which require costs and things like that. But yeah, I just tend to not refer to it in that case. Anyway, yeah, you can double the damage that Alexander would use using Scarmelian. Garnet. So, when you cast a summon, place 1 summon counter on Garnet, remove 1 summon counter from Garnet, choose 1 forward you control against plus 2,000 power till the end of the turn. So you cast Alexander, then you can use Garnet's little counter to then plus 2k, either the forward that would then become the largest, or you can kind of lean into Alexander and give something plus 5k instead. Ovalia. So let's say your opponent's like, actually I want to get rid of that big forward that's going to kill me. So like the example I used earlier, they want to actually get rid of Minerva, who is the highest power forward on your field, as opposed to something little which you're targeting with Alexander. You can then in response use Ovalia to make sure that forward then comes back onto the field, and then when Alexander resolves, it's still the highest power forward on your field, so it will still deal the damage as such. Alright, next we got Remora. I don't know why this software is taking a little bit longer now, but typical really, isn't it? Anyway, Remora, a 6 CP water summon EX burst. Choose 1 forward to draw 1 card. Then, until the end of the turn, it loses 2,000 power for each card in your hand. Personally, it's one of my favourite summons in the entire game. I think it's just, it doesn't require too much in hand for it to be effective, and ultimately you still get to draw a card from it, and it's EX burst. I really like that. So something like Unalesca. So obviously you could have the Una backup reduce, which reduces the costs of your water summons, but also having something like Unalesca and other summoner forwards means that Remora can go down to being a 3 CP or 2 CP summon, which is fantastic. And also, actually, and Unalesca can actually actually put Remora back into your deck as well, which means that then there is then more potential for Remora to be hit as an EX burst as well. Anyway, Yuna. So when you cast a summon, you may dull Yuna if it is active. If you do so, draw one card. This effect will trigger only once per turn. So let's say you have Yunalesca and Yuna on the field. That would mean that Remora only then costs you 4 CP. What you could then do is cast Remora with only your backups, or if you do need to discard a card from hand, discard, and then Remora obviously will draw your card to hand, which means that that's replacing the card that you had to discard to cast Remora, but then you can also use Yuna to dull and get you another card to hand, thereby increasing the amount of power that Remora will drain from a forward you target. Len. Why not keep it the Final Fantasy X theme? You can attack with Len and, potentially Yuna as well, and search Remora, and this is just a great way to be able to cast Remora without having to use any backups or any cards from hand, and still be able to minus something for a lot. So you could have just 4 cards in hand, that is still minus 8k, which is enough to take out most forwards. And yeah, you're not having to pay anything. Now, obviously, this will kill Len, but you're only going to be getting this off if you are party attacking. So it means that you are ultimately still getting an attack, hopefully through. But it's just a great way to be able to search and play that summon immediately and hopefully get rid of a problematic forward. Then you got Suzuhisa, so any auto ability on your opponent's field just triggers him, gets put into the break zone, draw 2 cards to hand. Just a great way to be able to kind of upcycle some cards from hand to be able to get more into hand. And maybe Suzuhisa triggers, gets you 2 cards to hand, at which point you can then cast Remora to be able to kill something, whereas before you couldn't. Rydia, again similar to Len, when Rydia enters the field, place 1 summon counter on Rydia, remove 1 summon counter from Rydia, cast 1 summon other than Light or Dark from your hand without paying the cost. So it actually means that Rydia, you can just pay 6 for her, and then maybe a couple of turns down the line you have Remora come to hand, or you've kept Remora in hand waiting to cast it. All you've got to do is remove that singular counter, and then boom, you cast Remora and you minus 10k something, 12k something, who knows. Both Earth and Water have some really good abilities to be able to get lots of cards in hand, either drawing with Water or recursion with Earth, and it just means that you're able to minus something and also draw again through Remora. And Melty Gemini, the power of forwards cannot be increased by summons or abilities. So let's say Remora actually doesn't kill something. Chances are it's going to be very low in power though. Like even if it's a 10k forward and you've got 4 cards in hand, when you cast Remora, that's still only going to become 2k, at which point, if you've got something like Melty Gemini on the field, your opponent's not going to be able to buff him any further. So if they would have liked to have used something to stop it from dying by buffing it and giving it first strike, who knows, chances are they're not going to be able to do it anymore because Melty Gemini will stop that. Zidane, so if you have 6 or more cards in hand, Zidane cannot be blocked, so that obviously leans heavily into something like Remora. Also, when Zidane deals damage to your opponent, you get to draw 2 cards as well. Again, fantastic. And then you've also got Zidane's Solution 9, which until the end of the choose one forward until the end of the turn, it loses 2,000 power for each card in your hand. So these 2 cards are a match made in heaven because they basically all do the same thing, and Zidane just gets you more cards to hand as well. Ifrita, select one of the 3 following actions. If you have a total of 5 or more card Ifrita and or Ifrit in your break zone, before paying the cost for Ifrita, select up to 3 of the 3 following actions instead. Choose one forward, deal it 7k, choose a monster of cost 3 or less and break it, and deal 3,000 damage to all the forwards your opponent controls. So what it means by that is basically you can't discard an Ifrit and that then count towards Ifrita's counting of those Ifrits in your break zone. So that's just the way the summons work anyway. Technically, you reveal them first before paying the cost to show the effect, and then you pay the cost. But yeah, a really good card, I think, in Fire, and just more monster breaking, to be honest, is always great because it's always that one monster your opponent plays when you go, this is actually going to screw me for the rest of the game, and you might lose because of it. So having that just additional monster break is really useful, in my opinion. But something like Shantoto. So let's say Ifrita has 3 Ifrits or Ifritas in the break zone. What you can do is cast Ifrita, deal 3k to your opponent's board, but then deal 7k to Shantoto. Now that's not going to kill Shantoto, but it is going to trigger Shantoto's ability, and there'll be 3k dealt to your opponent's board, 7k dealt to Shantoto. That will then trigger 7k around the board, which will then, that will be a 10k total to your opponent or to your opponent's forward, and will hopefully remove all of their forwards, But also what's good about this is the fact that even if you have forwards on your side, hopefully 7k isn't enough to actually wipe your forwards off the field. Vermilion Birdlessy Kaituna. So obviously, if a forward is dealt damage by your fire summon, the damage is increased by 1,000 instead. You can also play Vermilion Bird 2 cast Ifrita if you want as well, which is good. But yeah, again, Ifrita, you can then deal 4k to your opponent's board and then deal 8k to something, and that obviously works excellently with something like Shantoto, because then that's 4k to your opponent's board, 8k to Shantoto, that's then 12k to your opponent's board. That will definitely be removing things. Terra, if a forward is dealt damage by your summon, damage is increased by 7k in 7k? Where did I pull that from? By 2,000 instead. So similar sort of thing like Kaituna, apart from different, obviously. But yeah, being able to deal 9k to a forward and then deal 5k to your opponent's board, that's pretty nasty. I mean, you could try and wangle Terra into an Earth Fire deck, to use alongside Shantoto if you really wanted, but I wouldn't recommend it. But I just think that's fantastic. Be able to deal just 5k to your opponent's board for only 3 CP, really good. But then also deal 9k to something else as well, excellent. Cyan! Now you've probably seen this before if you played in or you played against an even relatively meta deck, because Samurais were fairly big a few sets ago. So when a Job Samurai or card name Samurai you control attacks, deal 1,000 damage for each Job Samurai or card name Samurai you control to all the forwards your opponent controls. So you could just have 4 Samurais on your field and then just attack with a singular Samurai, that's 4k to the board, and then you can use Ifrita to then deal 3k to the board, and that is then a total of 7k. Pretty decent, but obviously Cyan is when a Job Samurai or card name Samurai you control attacks. So, you know, you can have multiple stacking. You can party attack with 2 Samurais and all of a sudden you're dealing stupid amounts of damage to the board. But if you've got just a couple of Samurai backups and only Cyan forward, then Ifrita helps kind of keep the consistency with board-wide damage. The Mega Sisters, so I mentioned this in last week's episode, but cast Mega Sisters to search yourself an Ifrit, put it into the break zone, which then works towards Ifrita's text of being able to increase the Ifrits or Ifritas in your break zone to make sure that she can use all 3 of her abilities. Soldier 3rd class, I just really like this combo because I really like this card. But yeah, being able to deal 3k to your opponent's board, which then effectively makes Soldier 3rd cast an 8k attacker / blocker. If you have Kaituna down, it effectively makes him a 9k blocker. So, it's a nice little combo. Bahamut. So both of these cards synergize well because of the fact that they both like lots of fire summons in the break zone. Obviously Ifrita focuses more on Ifrit, but Bahamut for some reason doesn't have that stipulation. He doesn't want more Bahamuts in your break zone, but yeah, that works for Ifrita at least. But if you have 7 or more fire summons in your break zone, Bahamut gains when he attacks deal 5k damage to all the forwards your opponent controls, which you could then synergize with the doing 3k to your opponent's board and then deal 7k to something else. I mean, that's 8k to the board alone. That's not including the fact you could have something like Manasvin Warmech on Bahamut to increase the damage he's dealing by 2k, or something like Kaituna to increase the damage that Ifrita is doing as well. Exodus the Judge-Sal. Select one number. Your opponent selects one number. Break all the forwards of cost equal to either number. So it's like Fanfrit on steroids, but also not great because it's not in EX, and it's probably going to benefit your opponent as much as it's going to benefit you. But I think he's still got a place because ultimately, especially against something like Shikari decks, because you can just play him like break 2s and they're all gone. But yeah, you have to be careful how you play him, and he's oftentimes too niche to be able to really benefit you. But if you're building a deck where he works well, then why not go for it? So, Edward, during your opponent's attack phase, when a forward you control is put from the field into the break zone, your opponent discards 1 card from their hand. So let's say you've got 3 backups on the field, 3 forwards on the field, and your opponent goes to attack phase, and I don't know, all your forwards are of the same cost or whatever. You cast Exodus. They choose a number, you choose a number, all your forwards break, they then have to discard 3 cards, not including any of the leave the field abilities that some of your forwards might have as well. So maybe you have something like Black Waltz, where you can make your opponent discard through that as well. It just kind of leans heavily into that whole discard, and you've also broken a lot of forwards, hopefully. whilst that's good and you're making your opponent discard a lot of cards, try to at least break some of your opponent's forwards as well. You technically could just cast Exodus and then choose a number of only your forwards. So if your opponent has no 3-cost forwards, but you've got a couple, and you then cast it and say 3, you can break only yours if you really want to, but only if it's beneficial. Anima. So when a forward opponent controls put from the field into the break zone, choose one forward opponent controls and dull it. So let's say Exodus breaks 2 of your opponent's forwards and breaks maybe a couple of yours, but doesn't kill Anima, but your opponent's got 2 more forwards on the field, you can actually dull them out with Anima because you broke 2 of their forwards. Militesi Coel. So less this card and more just monsters. So obviously Militesi can become a forward, but it's up to you when it does. So you can cast Exodus and just break a few of your opponent's forwards, and they can look at your field and be like, you don't actually have any monster or don't have any forwards, so there's no number applicable for you. So it's actually benefited you more than it has your opponent, and then you can make Militesi or whatever monster you want a forward and go swinging through. Kadaj. So obviously Kadaj leaves the field at the end of your turn and re-enters at the end of your opponent's turn. But before you get to the end of your opponent's turn, you can cast Exodus to then hopefully break a couple of forwards, and then including 4 CP forwards as well. And Kadaj will be protected from that. He then comes in at the end of their turn, and he is there ready to attack on your phase. And hopefully you get to break a load of things. Maybe you broke a couple of forwards opponents, and then when Kadaj enters, you can choose to dull your opponent's remaining forward. Regis. So a lot of recursion, obviously, and it's the right element, which is excellent. But you could cast Exodus, maybe break all your opponent's field, but also break all your field as well. You then play Regis to bring those forwards back. That's not including any of the entry abilities you might get from those forwards as well. Just pretty good. Ovalia. So a similar sort of thing to Regis, to be honest, but at least this you have to be careful of, because ultimately you have to kind of predict what forward they're going to pick. If it's fairly obvious and you know that they're going to pick X forward or X number, then you can do that. But say you want to protect a forward, but it's not of a number you want to select, you have to be wary of that. So maybe using Ovalia beforehand to be able to make sure that that forward will come back onto the field, but ultimately your opponent's going to be happy to see you use that Ovalia to get nothing from it. So again, you have to be careful with this, and because Exodus does state select, it means that that happens at resolution. So you can't select a number and then be like, oh, and Ovalia S ability. So you have to be very predictive with this sort of thing. But, you know, you can also use it to your advantage, and you can use Ovalia on a forward you want to sack off, and then you cast Exodus, you say the number of that forward, it leaves the field, it comes back in, and if it's something like Agrias, which works excellently with Ovalia, then you can also bring her back in, and not to mention the fact that Ovalia gets you a card to hand for any FFT forwards breaking, or once per turn anyway. So Agrias will break, come back onto the field, -7k, draw your card, and also getting to draw a card from Ovalia because Agrias broke. Just another way to be able to kind of sack things off on your side, but still gain a good field from it, and more cards to hand. And there we go, ladies and gentlemen. Episode 49 done. Episode 50. We're nearly there. We are nearly there. And there's going to be a change in the way that things are done. But I shan't reveal all now. But there will be more shows more frequently. Maybe a different setup behind me. I'm not entirely sure yet. I have to move everything in the office, which isn't going to be fun, but it does mean that there will be more content coming your way, my friends, so I hope you look forward to that. Make sure to like and subscribe. It does help the channel, genuinely does. And once we get to 250 subscribers, I will also be running a competition as well, where you can win 3 probably Opus 14 packs, which is really good because Opus 14 is looking to be like a wonky Opus with lots of power creep, but hopefully lots of fun. Anyway, stay safe, be lucky, and I'll see you in the next video.